They're with me here on Zoom, and many, many friends who are with us all on Facebook and on YouTube. I hope that you're having a very good afternoon. This is the third day in a row here in Southern California that you can actually say it's cold. It has plunged to a frigid 69 degrees, and it's been something. So we're really delighted that everyone's here with us and sharing a warm afternoon of Jewish learning together. Hope that you're taking care and staying well during all of this crisis. And I hope that the tension and anxiety that's surrounding the election hasn't gotten hasn't been too much of a burden on your heart. And for those of you who live here in Southern California, last night the Dodgers won the World Series, so there is proof of God in the universe. You have to know that that's the truth. So we're really good that I'm really glad everybody's with us. Today, what we're going to do is a different kind of psalm. So we've looked at the book of Psalms, the great book of biblical poetry, now for several weeks. And I put out the proposition at the beginning of our conversation that the book of Psalms is in fact a compilation of poetic reflections on all of the repertoire of human life, of all of the experiences of human life. And we've seen Psalms that dealt with wonder at the natural world. We've seen Psalms that dealt with a sense of being rescued. We've seen Psalms of praise of God, a sense that God is watching out for us, God is caring for us. We've seen Psalms filled with wisdom about how one ought to live life. And those are all very positive. And all the Psalms that we've looked at so far are very positive Psalms. Today, we're going to turn to a different set of Psalms, to a set of Psalms which is not so positive. That is to say that included in the repertoire of life are experiences of a world that's difficult, a world that can be unjust, a world that can be cruel, a world that can be brutal, both individually and collectively. We have individual moments of our difficulty. We have individual moments of pain and suffering. And at the same time, we have collective moments of pain and suffering. And if the book of Psalms is going to be true to its mission, to reflect the full repertoire of human responses to the human condition, it has to include those as well. But of course, this is going to present a difficult issue for the psalmist and a difficult issue for its theology, because the psalmist begins with the notion that God is ruling the world, and that all things that happen in the world, at least in some way, in some fashion, come from God. And therefore, when the psalmist is suffering, either individually or collectively, the question is, why has God allowed this to happen? Why is God not intervened to fix this? Is this the justice that God intends? We call this in theology theodicy, which is the justification of God. The problem of theodicy is what's called the problem of evil. And in this case, what evil means are experiences when the innocent suffer, experiences when the world appears to be unjust or amoral, when people who have earned reward in the world seem to be suffering. It presents us with the most significant of all theological problems. How can you go on believing in a God who is governing the universe if it appears that there are evil things that happen in the world and God doesn't want to do anything about it? Or they're evil, that is, unjust things that are happening in the world, and there's no way to explain why it's happening. Now, the classic answer to the problem of evil is given already in the book of Deuteronomy. It's given actually before that, of course, in the book of Genesis, when the book of Genesis offers us the idea when Joseph's brothers finally come down to Egypt and and Joseph confronts them and they confess what they've done to Joseph. Joseph says to them, "Don't be worried. What you intended, God turned it to good." So the classic answer to the problem of evil, the problem of theodicy, is to see that that there is a great master plan with a capital P to all of our existence, and that while we may be suffering at this moment, it's only because from our point of view, we can't see the whole landscape of human existence, and we can't see the whole landscape of what's happening to us. And if we could see the whole landscape, we would see that even the events of suffering turned out to be good. My teacher, David Hartman, used to call this upstairs and downstairs history. Downstairs history is the flow of events that are coming at us, and we can't quite understand why this is happening to us. But when you climb upstairs and can see the landscape, you can see that even sometimes the things that were so difficult and painful, the experiences of suffering that we didn't want and didn't ask for, turned out to be beneficial in some strange way, right? The person who has a flat tire on the freeway, and the tow truck comes, and while the AAA person is fixing the tire, he's whistling Verdi, and you say, my God, that's Verdi. And the person says, I love Verdi. And you say, well, I have tickets to see a Verdi opera on Saturday night. Would you like to come with me? And the person says, I would be delighted to come with you. And you go on a date, and 3 years later, you're married and have 3 children. And you say, it's a damn good thing that I called the AAA and had that flat tire at that very place. And, you call that in Yiddish, you call that beshert. Beshert means it's post facto determinism. After the thing has happened, I look back and I say, my God, there was a plan at work here. Well, beshert works if things work out well. But if things don't work out well, are we still willing to say that there was a plan here? The book of Deuteronomy rushes in at this point and says, well, there is a plan. And here is the order of the plan. The plan is that good behavior, right choices are rewarded by God, and bad choices, the choice of evil, is punished by God. And the notion of reward and punishment. Now, I think all of us in some sense grow up with this. No matter how benign and kind and loving your parents were, if they ever disciplined you, all of us internalize this idea that if I'm a good boy, I'll get rewarded. And if I'm a bad girl, bad boy, I'm going to be punished. And even though we're adults and we can see that that's just not the way the world works, I think at some level, all of us maintain this. And that therefore, when bad things happen to us, we tend to ask the question, why me? Why did this happen to me? On the presumption that there's a God who is rewarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior. So we can ask the question, why me? Now you get into, from that question, we jump into numbers of other more sophisticated, rather more complicated notions of theodicy. The Talmud, for example, asks a very silly question. Suppose a man steals a bag of seed from his neighbor's farm and plants it in his own. What's going to happen? Well, the seed is going to grow. And the question is, why is the seed going to grow? Din hu shelo titzmach, says the Talmud. It would be just. If God is ruling the world and nature is under God, then God should not let this seed grow. It's stolen. And then the Talmud concludes, Olam kemin hago noheg, because the world pursues a natural course, because nature is amoral, because nature doesn't care where the seed came from. If you plant it in water, it's going to grow. Then the Talmud goes on to the next level and says, suppose a guy goes next door and has relations with his neighbor's wife. Din hu shelo titaber, she should not conceive. But olam kemin hago noheg, the world pursues a natural course. Sperms and eggs don't know where they come from or what were the circumstances of their union. And therefore, nature is not going to be depended upon to be an instrument of goodness and evil, of reward and punishment in the world, according to that opinion of the Talmud. Well, if nature is not an instrument of good and evil in the world, then you don't complain. You don't say, why me? Because nature is fundamentally amoral. And therefore, you can't depend upon it to follow moral rules. And this is the great discussion that begins already in the Bible and continues all through Jewish history. And I don't have to tell you that right after the Holocaust, as we began to become aware of the atrocities of the Nazis, this question became the central question of Jewish theology in modern times. And people like my teacher, Rabbi Harold Shul, spent a great deal of his career wrestling with this issue and trying to figure out a way for an intelligent, thinking, critical Jew to believe in a God, while at the same time recognizing that not just bad things, but atrociously bad things happen in the world to very, very good and righteous people, and to put the two together. Now, what we're going to find in the book of Psalms is not a theodicy. We're not going to find a theology, a belief system that's going to explain this. What we're going to find is an emotional response. What happens when bad things happen to us? What happens when someone backs into us at the parking lot at Trader Joe's? What happens when the tax bill comes and it's all messed up and we're being tortured by that? What happens when illness comes? What happens when bad stuff happens to us and we feel like we didn't deserve this, we didn't call this upon ourselves? How is it that we respond? So let's take a look now. I have three of them. I don't know if we'll have time to get through all of them, but we'll take a look at least two of them. So we begin here with the 10th Psalm, Psalm number 10. Remember, there's 150 of them, some of them very short, just a few lines, some of them awfully long, all of them deeply emotional, okay? And as you see how this one starts, it begins with an address to God, right? Oh, why, O Lord, do you stand aloof, heedless in times of trouble? So this psalmist, the poet here, was looking at a world of trouble, a world of pain. And his first response is, where are you, God? Why are you watching this happen to me and not doing anything? Why do you allow this to happen in your world? Again, he's not going to be explaining the way that a philosopher might. He's going to be just responding. This is the why me. This is the crowd of why me. And now he elaborates on the situation. The wicked in his arrogance hounds the lowly, but is caught in the schemes he devises. The wicked crows about his unbridled lusts. The grasping man reviles and scorns the Lord. The wicked, arrogant as he is in all his scheming things, he does not, says he does not call to account. There is no God. Now, if you can imagine this, by the way, so he's quoting the wicked. And the wicked here, I don't think the wicked here are, I don't think the wicked here are people doing radical evil. I think it's the hounding the lowly, which suggests that these are the powerful people who live in every culture, in every society, who seem to who take it out, who oppress the poor and the helpless. And the question is, why does God allow them to do it? Why does God allow this wicked person to crow in his unbridled lusts? Why does he allow this wicked person to revile and scorn God? And why does he allow this person to claim that there's no accounting, there's no moral accountability in the world, and even to say there is no God? This is a proof to you that atheism isn't a modern invention. But the idea that even if he doesn't say it, he behaves that way. He behaves like there's no moral accounting. A person who does whatever he damn well pleases and has no sense that he is called to account for the behavior that he does. And he's talking here about the wicked, right? His ways prosper at all times. Your judgments are far beyond him. He snorts at all of his foes. He thinks, I shall not be shaken. Through all the time, never be in trouble. His mouth is full of oaths, deceit, and fraud. Mischief and evil are under his tongue. He waits in ambush in outlying places, from a covert that is a hiding place. He slays the innocent. He spies. His eyes spy out the hapless. He waits in a covert like a lion in his lair, waits to seize the lowly, seizes the lowly as he pulls his net shut, stoops and crouches, and hapless fall prey to his might. He thinks God is not mindful. He hides his face. He never looks. So you have the picture here of the evil, a picture here of the evil person. And the evil person here is the embodiment not just of an evil person, but of all of the things that happen in life. All of the things that happen in life. Number one, that these evil things sort of sneak up on us. They're the way that they sneak up us and steal life away from us and steal our joy and steal our happiness. And then beyond that, what really bothers him isn't just that this guy does evil, and isn't just that this guy has no sense of moral accountability, that he proclaims that God doesn't pay attention, but the arrogance of it, the fact that he's not even ashamed of what he does, that he does it right out there in front of everybody and doesn't even bother to hide what he does, because what he does, he believes is his right to do, is his place to do, it's his role to do, and nothing bothers him. You see, the evil person who feels compunctions, the evil person who feels, hesitation, the evil person who feels a tinge of guilt over what he does, that's one thing. But the evil person who does evil and is proud of it and has no compunctions, no sense of guilt. We'd all like to believe that evil people are, that they're tortured by their conscience at the end of the day. But that's not true. I mean, I wish it were true. I really do wish it were true. The Houston Astros stole a World Series from the Dodgers by cheating, and they didn't bother them at all. What bothered them was they got busted. They got caught, right? The kid who beat me up in junior high school didn't have any compunctions. He beat me up and stole my lunch money, right? I'm going to find him one day. I hope he's getting audited. But the point is that we'd all like to believe, we who are good, we who believe that we are morally accountable, we'd like to believe that evil people suffer in some fashion. Remember, there was once a book called The Inner City Mother Goose, which was a twisted version of fairy tales. And it starts with, there was once a wicked, wicked man, and he did very, very well. People don't pay attention. I mean, there is a sort of, and not even sure he's talking about a sociopath who's a person who really doesn't even recognize that he does evil. This is a character type of an arrogant person who believes that that he should grasp at every possibility, even if it hurts other people, and has no sense of his moral accountability to the world. And this is what the psalmist is objecting to. This is what the psalmist finds so very, very difficult. So let's take a look inside. Rise, O Lord, strike at him. Do not forget the humble. So here we have a prayer in response to that, in response to the evil, in response to his evil. He's saying, God, do something. Why should the wicked scorn God, thinking you didn't call account? You do look. Now here, he's not just begging God. He's not just begging God for a response. He's doing more than just begging God for a response. He's reminding God of what his role is in all of this. He's reminding God of what God owes the world, of what God ought to be doing for us in the world. And that's a remarkable thing. I mean, just to remind God of what your role is. Your role in the world, God, is to take care of the lowly. Your role is to champion justice. And why aren't you doing it? It's more than a complaint. It's actually a remarkable statement of a human being reminding God of what he owes the world, where God ought to be fitting into the world. Let's take a look at this again if I can. Oh, there you go. Okay, good. Right? Rise, O Lord, strike at him, O God. Do not forget the humble. Why should the wicked man scorn God, thinking you do not call account? Why do you let people besmirch your reputation? Right? You do look. You take note of mischief and vexation. Vexation is a fancy word for the pain that somebody imposes upon God's world. It is you who helps the orphan. Oh, break the power of the wicked and the evil man, so that when you look for his wickedness, you will find it no more. So he's not explaining. He's not explaining. He's not going to explain to us why God allows this to happen, because this isn't a philosophy. This is a cry. Why do you allow this to happen? How can you be watching this and not do anything about it? Now, I just want to fill in a bit of history. This is going to become one of the modes of Jewish prayer. That is, Jews over the centuries are going to experience terrible oppression and persecution and suffering. And what happens is they don't give up on God. What they do is they call upon God, they protest to God, they yell at God. I mean, the most famous one, there's two really famous ones. One of the most famous ones, of course, is the end of the story of Rabbi Akiva's martyrdom, which then becomes a trope that follows us through Jewish history. In the story, when Rabbi Akiva is taken out to be tortured by the Romans, he's arrested for the crime of teaching Torah, and he's taken out and tortured to death by the Romans. And then the scene in the story, it's in the Midrash, in the Talmud Shabbos, the scene switches to heaven. And the angels say to God, Zo Torah v'zo schara. This is the man's Torah. This is his full and complete devotion to God and to Torah and to the Jewish people. And this is the reward that you mete out to him. Now that phrase, Zo Torah v'zo schara, is going to follow us through all of Jewish history. Remember, it was the rabbis that told that story. So the idea is that while here in heaven, all we see is the torture of the poor man, we see the evil prosper. In heaven, there's an argument. There's a dialogue. And the rabbis imagine that there's this upper morality, and God has to give an answer, but God doesn't give an answer. God says, shtok, that's the way I built the universe. You find the same thing on Yom Kippur. There's a prayer that is recited in the traditional Machzor on Yom Kippur called Eila Eskara. It's a story about the martyrdom of the great rabbis of the 2nd century. But it was really the story, it was written during the Crusades as Jewish communities were being destroyed. And here too, the angels come to God and they say, how can you allow this to happen? And God says, one more word of protest and I will destroy the world altogether. I'll return it to its primeval chaos. But the idea is that within our own liturgy, at the same time as you're praising God and praising him for mercy and justice on Yom Kippur, there is this protest that, some things happen in the world which are outside, which God can't explain. Why, God, don't you do something about this? And then I think the most famous one is the famous Kaddish of Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. So Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev is a great Hasidic master, the 3rd, 4th generation of the Hasidic masters. And there's a story that he stood in front of the Ark on Yom Kippur. And when it was time to say the Kaddish in front of the Ark of Yom Kippur, he stops and he says, God, we have sinned terribly this year. But God, you've sinned even more. Your sins upon the Jewish people, the suffering of our exile, the suffering of our existence is even greater than anything we could have done in front of you. So I'll tell you what, we'll swap you. If you'll forgive us for our sins, we'll forgive you for your sins. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba. And this idea that a rabbi had the chutzpah, and you understand this is a deeply, deeply religious man, has the chutzpah to stand in front of the Ark on Yom Kippur, to stand in front of God, and to say, I accuse you. I accuse you of hurting your people, or of allowing your people to suffer. That's the same trope that we find here, the same theme that we find here in the 10th Psalm. The idea that, dear God, rise up and do something. What's wrong? Why aren't you rising up? So remember how he began. This is the framing of the Psalm. The first line of the Psalm is, why, O Lord, do you stand aloof, heedless, as paying no attention in times of trouble? And here at the end, he comes back and he says, rise, O Lord, strike at him, do not forget the humble. Why should the wicked man scorn and you don't give account? You do look. And he reminds him, you are the helper of the orphan. Break the power of the wicked and evil man, and so that when you look for his wickedness, you find it no more. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations ever perish from his land. You will listen to the entreaty of the lowly. Now, you will hear, is it a plea, please listen to, or is it a prediction, or is it a statement of fact? You will listen to the entreaty of the lowly. You will make the hearts firm. You will incline your ear, the champion of the orphan and the downtrodden, that men who are of the earth tyrannize no more. That's his statement of faith at the very end. So here you have that same statement. All of us feel this sometimes when things just gang up on us, and we watch the evening news, and you just say, like, how can it be this way? Where is justice? Where is righteousness? Where is that force? Now, the difference is, and I'll finish with this and allow some conversation, is that following the Holocaust, the theologies that came from theologians following the Holocaust removed the onus on God and put that on human beings. Rabbi Schulweiss's idea that that godliness resides in us, and that when God is revealed in the world, it's because of our own moral responsibilities. Yitz Greenberg's idea that God taught us responsibility through God's inaction during the Holocaust, and now the responsibility weighs upon us. Same thing with David Hartman, these great theologians. Now that has a lot to do, I think, with our sense of agency, our sense of human empowerment that we have gained in the post-world, post-war world, that we have gained, and Jewish life in particular in America has given us a sense of we are empowered. Right? I think the psalmist reflects a different world where there was no sense of power. And that empowerment theology is how we would answer some of these questions. But you can feel in his psalm that there is nothing more than simply the cry toward heaven. That's all he has at his disposal. I think you got to take this with some seriousness. I do. I take this with some seriousness. I mean, we're talking about vaccines coming to cure the COVID virus. You understand that 100, 200 years ago, none of this medicine existed. And if a person got sick, you were basically helpless. There was nothing that a doctor could do but put a blanket on you and make you feel comfortable. That we live in a different world because of our empowerment. And that's one of the reasons why the psalm may or may not resonate with us, because of our own sense of empowerment. And when we see evil in the world, part of it is we sense a sense of responsibility and a call, a demand to respond. But that's also a product of our empowerment that comes with modernity, that comes with democracy, that comes with the change of conditions under which we live. All right, let's stop a moment. I'll ask our panel of experts here if anyone has a question or a comment. Bert, you get the first one. Go ahead.
Yeah, what just occurred to me, Rabbi, is God gave us a code by which to live. You're suggesting now that in the Psalm, we're or in the modern philosophy, theology, we're taking responsibility or acknowledging responsibility as moving from God to us. So why do I need God?
It's
I've
not
got
a
a code. I'm responsible now for stuff. That's nice. Why do I need God?
Yeah. Okay. Good question. So I'll give you three answers because I don't know the answer. Okay. So when a rabbi gives you three answers, it means he's not sure. Okay. Rabbi Schulweiss would say the part of us that responds to the evil and brokenness and suffering in the world is God. That's the God within you. The part of us that pushes us beyond the limits of our own ego. There's no reason for a person who lives in a comfortable home on a beautiful street in Encino, like you, Bert, or like me, to have to stretch across our boundaries to people who live in another neighborhood, whose standard of living is significantly below us, whose culture is different than ours, whose skin is a different color. And yet we feel called to step outside of our comfort, to step outside of our boundaries, because we feel like the world, we are responsible for people, even though those people live in different circumstances and are different. That transcendent, that's the word for it, transcend, which means to go beyond your own limitations, to accept a responsibility, to hear the call of responsibility. Schulweiss says, that's all the God I need to see in the world. That's all the God I need to see in the world, right? And for Rabbi Schulweiss, that's what it is. And that's what he would celebrate in all of his teaching, was celebrating moral courage and moral action. Sometimes great moral courage. You remember for many years we used to bring to Valley Beth Shalom rescuers, people who rescued from the Holocaust. We had we had a wonderful night celebrating the people of Denmark. The Danish saved 90% of their Jews by ferrying them across the straits into Sweden during the winters of 42 and 43. And we had this gentleman who was a policeman. He was a policeman in Copenhagen and then the port cities. And now he lived in Orange County, and we brought him to VBS. And we had a chance, and he spoke. He's a very sweet, humble man. He has a printing business in Orange County. But when he was a kid, he was one of those guys. And he would say he worked all day as a policeman, and at night they would give him a list of where the Jews were hiding. And he would go and he would take them quietly through the dark streets of Copenhagen down to the port, pay off a fisherman to take them across the straits to Sweden. And we asked him, how many Jewish people did you save? He said, I don't know, I did this for 2 years, a lot. And then we asked him, why did you do it? And he looked at us like we were crazy and said, it was the right thing to do. So for Rabbi Schulweis, the answer is, that is the God you find in the world. For Harold Kushner, who wrote that book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, the God is the part of us that pushes, the God is the part of us that inspires and pushes people to do the right thing. Not too far from Schulweis, but that there's even more for Kushner, who has an idea of a God who is transcendent, that God is still there in the world, giving us strength to do these things, is a more of a transcendent idea of God. So that's where these guys would find God. But they're not going to find God in the tragedy. They're going to find God in the response. Right? When people ask me, why did my loved one get sick? I'll say, because you had bad genetics. There's no divine punishment here. God didn't bring you cancer, didn't bring me cancer. But when I was suffering with cancer, I was very inspired by the doctors and the nurses who took care of me. I was inspired by the drugs that they brought me that took care of me. Now, I had a very benign result, so I acknowledge that. But even people, I think, even people who suffer some terrible things, when the community shows up to bring comfort and strength, there's something of God there in the response, not in the tragedy. It's a very good question. Douglas, did you have a question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Please.
I have a question. Theodicy.
Yeah.
The Holocaust raises no new theological issues in terms of theodicy.
That's debatable, but go ahead.
It only differs in magnitude and scope. It doesn't differ in the issue of human evil. That you can go back to Cain and Abel and say, why didn't God intervene there?
There's a cottage industry in depicting the Holocaust as sui generis, as a unique event in human experience. I think that case can be argued and your case can be argued, but go ahead.
Well, you've got the most advanced, most civilized society in history up till that moment. Yes. Literature, Goethe, Schiller, music, Mozart, Beethoven, philosophy, Kant, Hegel, and they're institutionalizing killing. That's what's amazing about it, is that, they're looking at cost-effective means of killing. I read Schulweis, I sort of find it unsatisfying. I read Yitz Greenberg, I sort of find it unsatisfying.
Why? How come?
Because, I want to punch God in the face. Why else? I mean,
then you'll appreciate Psalm 10, because that's exactly what Psalm number 10 is. I think that's a nice way to put it. This is a psalm of a person who is so thoroughly frustrated by the success of the evil in the world about us that he has to tell God, new God, do your job. Do your job. That's what the psalm says. So you'll appreciate this.
And so Yitz and Rabbi Schulweis and all these guys, they're describing secular humanism in religious terms.
Well, I would go, I don't think so, but I appreciate the critique. I appreciate the critique. Go ahead.
Yes, I've heard Yitz's analysis. I've read his Auschwitz essay. What he describes God as a parent who pulls back, and so,
yeah.
And do you pull back when your kid makes that kind of mistake? You know, or do you smack them on the head and go Dummkopf?
Right.
Do
But
you really
here's the
love your child that much to pull back that much?
all right. But step back for just a second. What's the alternative? So let me tell you what the alternative looks like. No, honestly. So the reason why you're right. I don't disagree, because you're trying to reconcile two beliefs which are incongruent. One is a belief that not only in the benevolence of a God, but the fundamental benevolence of the world. And the other is an act of evil, which is so radical in its scope and in its kind, that it's very difficult to see benevolence in the world, right? And they're really responding to one guy, and I'll tell you who they're responding to, right? They're responding to a philosopher whose name was Richard Rubinstein. Now, Richard Rubinstein graduated rabbinical school with Rabbi Schulweis, and they were colleagues, if not friends. Richard Rubinstein was a pulpit rabbi for about 15 minutes and decided he couldn't do it, so he became a college professor and taught at a number of different universities. And Rubinstein in 1960 writes an essay called After Auschwitz. And what he writes in After Auschwitz is, I can no longer believe in God in any way whatsoever. Because any way that you construct a belief in God based on the Bible, you say, leads me to believe that God is somehow responsible for the Holocaust and responsible for the Nazis and wanted that to happen. And any God that wanted 1 million Jewish children to die is not a God I'm ever going to worship again. And he said, I would rather believe in the universe as described by Alfred Camus, or Albert Camus, right? And Albert Camus, who says it's a cold, dark, empty, absurd universe. And the only meaning that you can find in the universe is the meaning that you put into the world. Okay? And there's nothing else to be found there, says Rubinstein. Because at least that way, he says, I can recognize the justice. I don't have to blame the victims. At least that way, I can recognize the heroism of those who went to the gas chambers with a certain degree of dignity. And I don't say that they were sinners being punished by an angry God. Now, that's Rubinstein. And Rubinstein, it makes a certain amount of sense logically. And Rubinstein, by the way, says, and Bert will appreciate this, Rubinstein says that doesn't mean that religion is outmoded. Religion is the way his phrase was, the way we hold our hands when we face the darkness. Okay? Now, Schulweis and Yitz Greenberg. Schulweis is a pulpit rabbi. Yitz Greenberg was for a while, but he's mostly a teacher. And he reads a statement like Rubinstein's and said, is that the only answer I can come up with? Because if that's the only answer to come up with, what kind of a world does that leave me to live in? A world of that kind of absurdity and evil and darkness and pain? Is there nothing redeeming in this world? Is there no sense of morality that is left in the world? You see, and I think that Rabbi Schulweis and Yitz Greenberg, David Hartman, this class of philosophers that are turning to human responsibility as their evidence of God in the world are trying to redeem a sense of the moral possibilities of the world that the Holocaust was snuffing out. Because the question is, if you really believed what Rubinstein is saying, that the world is a cold, dark, evil, absurd place, would any of us have had children? How can you bring children into a world like this? Would any of us have had children? So this is a deeply painful question, right? A deeply painful question. You have children because you believe that the world has moral possibilities, that you can leave your children in a world where there still are things that they can dream about and hope for and love. And that's why they write that kind of theology. Does that make some sense?
Of course it does. But for Schulweis, he's building his foundation on such a small percentage of humanity, the righteous Gentiles, right? That's that's his evidence of transformative possibility.
Yeah.
But it's such a, it's not the norm. It's rare. What percentage of you read history books, when COVID started, I read a book of a history book about FDR and Stephen S. Wise and the Holocaust. Stephen S. Wise, great rabbi. comes across in this book as so blinded by his own arrogance that he fails to do anything to help the Jews in the Holocaust.
Not exactly true. Not that's overstated.
Did you
That's
read the
over.
book?
Oh, yeah, that's overstated.
Did
There
you
are
read
people
Meadow?
that yes, and there's a whole nother way of looking at it. It's way overstated. Way overstated. Yeah, way overstated. Arrogant, of course, but not that was that way overstated.
Blinded
Okay.
by his loyalty to FDR and unwilling to take actions in cars in that. I mean, where's is the righteous Gentile is the one that Schulweis sees as transformative possibility. That is like, three standard deviations away from the mean. Even more than that. Is it so rare? Is he looking for and you know
No, he's looking for evidence that there still is moral possibilities, even in a very dark and difficult world. That's what
and
he's
he,
looking for. And righteous Gentiles give you that possibility of seeing that even under the worst of moral circumstances, human beings still possess the capacity to transcend themselves, transcend their moral limitations, and find goodness in the world. And that's a
but
very
it's
powerful statement. That's a
but
very powerful statement.
it's so rare.
I don't think it is and it isn't. It is and it isn't. Look, if you look for it in your own existence, you'll see it. I see it all the time. People who just do a wonderful. Look, I told you the little silly story. When the pandemic began, we ran to the market like everybody else, and there was a rush on toilet paper. And there was a guy standing, two people behind me, who had a 24 pack of toilet paper, and a lady standing in front of me at the line complaining that she has kids at home and can't find toilet paper. So the guy ripped open the bag and threw 6 rolls. He passed 6 rolls of toilet paper up to the woman and said, "Take these." And when she got to the clerk, he didn't know how to ring up 6 rolls. So he said, "Forget it. Anyone will do something that nice. Just go home." People do nice things all the time. There is a capacity to transcend our own narrow interests to do something good for people, right? I have a lot of faith in Anthony Fauci, right? Anthony Fauci is evidence that God hasn't given up on America yet, you know, and Martin Luther King and others. And you're right. Look, the evil's there. That's what this psalm is about. But that there are moral possibilities, I think you can make a case. Or hang on a minute, Stanley, you get the question.
Yeah. Do you think that Rabbi Schulweis at least attempted to answer these same questions, and for those who can't believe, that he made a somewhat different approach to theology or anything that you want to call it than what we're talking about right now?
Now, this is what we're talking about right now. So Schulweis is going to say, I mean, the psalm says to God, do your job. What the psalmist doesn't seem to say is what Schulweis would want him to say. The psalmist doesn't say, I'm going to go to war against that evil. That's what, God, you have taught me to do. And the psalmist isn't responding with a degree of moral responsibility and moral demand. The psalmist is sitting back and saying, why are you aloof, God? And why aren't you doing your job in protecting the innocent in the world? But what I'm suggesting is that contemporary theology, the theologies that I was raised on by Schulweis and Greenberg and Hartman and others, the answer would have been, and what is it to me? What am I called upon to do? Rabbi Heschel has a beautiful statement. He says, questions we ask about God are questions we ask about ourselves. So when you call upon God to protect the lowly, the humble, and the innocent, what you need to do is say, and what am I responsible for? And that's what's missing from the psalm. And I'm asking myself, why is that missing from the psalm? And I think on one level, it's because the psalm is an emotional response. It's not a theological response. Even the person who is acting morally in the world stops occasionally and says, why am I in this alone? Right? And then the other reason I suggested a moment ago was because, the other reason I suggested is because we live in a different universe, a different moral universe, because we have learned a sense of empowerment from the democracy we live in that has accepted us, from science and technology that has empowered us, and that has taught us from the time we were very small that we can change things in the world. right? If you feel a sense of helplessness in the world, you're going to look at God and the world differently than if you feel the sense of empowerment. And that's what I suggest. So let's take one more look at this psalm and we're going to call it a day. So here is Psalm 10 once again. Wait, I just lost it. Wait a second. Hang on a minute. These things run away from me. That's the problem. Here it is. Here is Psalm 10, a psalm of not desperation, but in a certain sense, a little bit of rage at God, a little bit a good sense, because he starts out by saying, "Why do you stand aloof, heedless in times of trouble?" And then down here he says, "Rise up and strike at him. Don't forget. Why should the wicked man scorn? You do look. You do take note. It's you who helps them. So break the power of the wicked." But the whole middle of the psalm is this amazing description of wickedness. And not just wickedness, but the arrogance of the evil. And it's the arrogance of the evil and the sense that the evil believe that they're not held accountable that bothers the psalmist so very much, and causes him to demand that God rise up and bring the evil to account. Next time we meet, I want to take a look at the other psalms that I have here, and that's the psalms of collective suffering. What happens when the whole Jewish people suffers? What happens to the whole Jewish people um, when we when we suffer a terrible calamity, and how does that affect our understanding, and how does that affect our place in the drama of good and evil in the world? And that's what we're going to take a look at next time. I want to thank all of you for being with me today. Thank you for this wonderful discussion. Thank everyone who's watching on Facebook. Please remember that morning minyan at 7:30, 10 o'clock on Shabbos, and 8:30 on Sunday. Evening minyan at 6 o'clock. We're going to be changing to 5 o'clock this next week because the clocks are going to change. So don't forget that Saturday night you change your clock. It's really important. Okay. Shabbos will have Torah study at 9 o'clock, davening at 10, and Rabbi Silverman's comments at 11:30. Lots of opportunities for doing Jewish learning here at VBS, and we're delighted that you're with us. And please remember, this week is election week. So here in Los Angeles, voting is now open. You can go and vote in person. There's a center at Skirball, and a friend of mine went there, Phil Canterbaran went there, and said it took 10 minutes. It was very, very comfortable, very, very safe. As well, there is a ballot collection box at Genesta Park, which is just past Balboa on Ventura Boulevard. I think it's getting late to put it in the mail, but if you do it today, you might get there. But it would be better to either drop it off at a vote center or drop it into the ballot box at Genesta Park. I just remember my uncle. I had an uncle who was a sweetheart, and election day would come, and he would get up early in the morning, having spent days and days and days reading the ballot, mastering all the candidates, reading all their stuff. And he would put on his best suit and put on his best hat, those days when men wore hats, and shine his shoes. And for him, voting day, election day, was Yontif. It really was a holiday. And I asked him, Uncle Sam, why are you so dressed up? What? And he looked at me and said, I came to this country from a place in which no Jew was ever allowed to have a voice or a vote. And to be in a country which considers me an equal, and my voice and my vote count, that's worth a yontif. That's worth a holiday. And I've always remembered the dignity of that day for him. So please take the time, read the ballot. A lot of the propositions are very, very difficult. We spend a lot of time trying to figure them out. Read them, vote conscientiously, but please exercise your democracy and vote. Take good care, everyone. Stay well. Have a